Welcome back to the AMA Non-Obvious Future of Marketing Summit. My next guest is Rebecca Messina, and we have been talking as if we were old friends already. So I'm so excited to welcome you to the show. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. And I thought that given your background, for people who don't know, I mean, you've been the chief marketing officer at many brands that we all recognize. You've been head of innovation, or at least driving a lot of innovation at Coca-Cola. You were chief marketing officer way back in the early days of Uber. You were at Beam Suntory, I suppose it is now. And you really were leading an entire marketing organization. And now you're at McKinsey and you're working with many different marketing leaders. And when we started to do some prep for this conversation, I thought an interesting place to start this kind of theme would be to get your take on this idea of essential versus non-essential. A lot of people have been talking about whether their jobs or their industry or what they sell is essential or not essential during the pandemic. And in some ways, they've kind of looked to the government to tell them whether it is or not, because there's criteria for that. And I wonder, when you think about marketing as an industry and as a field, has it become more essential? Has it become less essential? Is it going through this kind of crisis moment that some of us feel like it is? Or do you think it's as essential as it ever was? I mean, what's your take on that?
Oh, well, it's a lovely question, because when you position it like that or word it with that word essential that we've associated with true essential, I don't know if it's anything can stand up and live up to what some of our essential workers have truly been faced with. But
Yeah.
answering your question more directly, I think marketing, it's funny. I think about this. Marketing is essential if growth is essential and meaning is essential. I don't know where else you'll get that if you don't have marketing firing on all cylinders. So, what do I mean by that? In some cases, marketing is called growth. And I think that many people in a company are responsible for growth, but marketing has a unique position of really helping to write and drive that growth agenda, and deliver on it, be it very, very explicitly through potentially growth marketing and acquisition activities, and be it through how we create demand that might be a more long-term demand that we generate. But the thing that's become essential, and I think more and more brands are winning because of it, is meaning. If you don't have marketers and you don't really have that consumer centricity and that empathy and that stakeholder perspective, I think you could lose meaning as a brand. And I think meaning has become very, very important in these last few months.
Yeah, and it's interesting that one of the things that I've seen evolving, particularly when it comes to marketing leadership, is these different roles that have come into the C-suite that didn't exist maybe 10 years ago, right? You always had, well, not always, but for a long time, you've had a chief marketing officer. Now you have chief purpose officers, you have chief customer officers, you have chief brand officers, you have chief innovation officers. And to some degree, the person who's led the marketing function is kind of going through this crisis moment of thinking to themselves, well, do I still want to be a chief marketing officer? Like, should I turn that into the chief meaning officer, or should I, which by the way, the acronym still works, so that's good. Or should I make it something different? Or should I let someone else kind of handle innovation and therefore unintentionally say, well, I'm running marketing, but I'm not about innovation, which of course none of us want to say. So how have you seen that playing out in some of the organizations that you're working with and some of the marketing leaders you're dealing with? Are they struggling with this question? Do they have clarity on it? Does it vary from company to company? I mean, what are you seeing?
So I have about 30% of my time is with McKinsey, and about the other 70 is one-on-one with brands that are high growth, usually pretty purpose driven. Some might be pivoting from B2B to maybe a B2C play. Some might be going from bricks and mortar to a D2C. Others are brands that I've been involved in for different reasons over my career and have asked me to kind of come back in and play a role. But what's across all of them, whether it's the McKinsey side or the smaller brands, if you would, for lack of a better, easier term, I think you point to is when you have that many titles for marketing, it does say that people are struggling to understand what the role of marketing is. And I think in some ways, marketing's been depositioned or repositioned. And I would plead to the marketing leaders to stay on the front foot of what we're here to do. And I continue to believe it's growth and meaning with a whole lot of activities around that. It's funny, you mentioned 10 years ago. 10 years ago, Uber was born. There was no marketing leader in that C-suite. I came screeching in, 9 years later, and was the last hire into that C-suite. And to fill a marketing role, yet marketing had been There'd been space for it. There'd been people with marketing in their titles for 9 years, but there hadn't been anybody in the C-suite kind of defining what that meant. And ironically, in tech, you don't manage innovation. Innovation, maybe I could manage innovation in marketing, marketing techniques, approaches, things like that. But you
Hmm.
weren't managing innovation product. Product was managing that,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yep.
And that was
Yep.
a real shift for somebody who came from a CPG background where I, crafted and led that innovation agenda, I even managed R&D in my Beam role. So I think you're speaking right on a topic that's a hot one. We're calling marketing many different things. I actually stood up at one of my first Beam summits and talked about how maybe what they most needed was a chief meaning officer, because that
Cool.
is really the most unique space that I think marketing can fill. But because meaning is hard to quantify, we find we are very lucky right now that we have more data than ever and we can quantify more what we do than ever. I
Mm.
remember when we could quantify about 25% of marketing. In my last role at Uber, I could quantify 80% of what I spent in marketing. That's a big place to come from
Huge. Yeah.
in 20
Huge.
years, right? But
Hmm.
along the way, we're pulling out brand like it's a separate thing from marketing, and it's not. We're talking about growth like it's a separate thing from marketing, and it's not. And I think as leaders, it's our job to hold this tension and to kind of keep pulling this function forward and unifying it. But part of unifying it is not separating it from the company, it's integrating it into the company. And I think where we're seeing, and actually McKinsey's got some great research on this, where we're seeing the most successful CMOs and where marketing's got a kind of a more important role in the company is where it's really unifying the C-suite, because it does uniquely touch on so many different areas of the company. You're deeply involved in supply chain, you're deeply involved in finance, you're deeply involved in the employee value proposition and HR, et cetera, et cetera. And marketing has that unique space to hold.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, part of what you're describing, and I don't mean this to diminish it in any way, but part of what you're describing, I think, is the utopia of how marketing would like to be seen. Right? We go
Yeah.
across all of these things. We understand the customer. We understand the innovation. Uh, I know maybe too many people who, for whatever reason, and many times it's not their doing, don't have that type of perception of their role within the organization. People say that they're just responsible for this stuff, and they say, and what the stuff is generally minimizing
Communications
the
or right.
role of marketing,
Yeah.
right? It's saying just get the press releases out and run the ad, run the digital ad campaign, and that's your job. Like, don't tell me how to do this, don't tell me how to do that. I think that to some degree, one of the benefits of an organization like the AMA is that they're bringing together insights from people who've kind of seen that progression and maybe have a vision to be able to offer advice on the marketer who wants to get to be seen in that role, but is kind of struggling to make it happen for whatever reason. Maybe it's the perception of the leadership within the organization. Maybe it's just the nature of what they do. So I'm sure at many points in your career, you have been faced with that challenge yourself. I mean, you've had a global career spanning many different places. You've lived in Chile, you've lived in lots of regions and moved around from companies as well as in regions. I know you speak multiple languages, I think 4 languages, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've had to deal with this in many
Mm-hmm.
different ways.
Yeah.
And I wonder if maybe you could think back a little bit and share some things that have worked for you to help increase the respect that a marketing person will have in their organization for
Yeah.
themselves and for marketing in general.
It is true. I think it is a reality, and I think you nicely captured what's happening. I think this would be true even outside of marketing, but at least in my case, and maybe this is exposing my rebellious side, but I've kind of believed that you should really use your job description to take the job, but never really pay much attention to it after that. And what I mean by that is find the white space in the organization, find where value needs to be created and fill it. And I've been lucky to find myself in places and time at Coke or Uber or Beam or other where there was just some really necessary white space to fill. And if I went to my job description, it probably didn't say do this or do that. And so what I would suggest, one, is just look for where there's value to be created and create that. And that value will then get attributed to marketing, whether or not it was on your in your job description. The other thing is, I think I have found that I have decided that it's easier for me to meet people where they are with language than to force them to find marketing's language when they want to own. So
That's
what,
interesting. Yeah.
right? So when I went to Uber, I realized that brand was a bit of a four-letter word, and this is from a girl who like grew up where brand was king, the Coca-Cola company. but I knew that I couldn't walk in with that vernacular and think that it was going to become everyone else's. They had experienced enormous success. And for 9 years, they had done it without this word brand at the forefront. So instead, I tried to look at what language they did have, and they talked with an engineering language, and they could understand demand creation, demand generation, knowledge, intelligence, data, analytics, things that we also had at our fingertips in marketing. And so I would say to a marketer and there's a lot of specialists in marketing now. As a matter of fact, I think half our job as CMOs is to listen to the specialists and aggregate it and pull it all together and make something beautiful. Because
And we're going to come back to that because I have a question about that.
yeah,
But I
we're
want
hiring
to
people a lot smarter
yeah.
than us, who
Yeah.
know a lot more than I know. But I would say really watch your language. You know what I mean? That saying, and if you try to find language that unifies, even if it means the language is not that comfortable to me. If you're trying to bring 1,000 people, 500 people, 50 people, whatever it is, there's a language that can work for them, and it may not be your first language, if you know what I mean, but it will help immensely. And that's been something that's helped me. So my two things would be find the white space and watch your language.
Yeah, and to some degree, I think we should, at least as marketers and communicators, be uniquely qualified to do that, right? I mean, we should be the ones who are able to tell that story in the way that is compelling and be the most persuasive people
Right.
in the room compared to everyone else. You started to talk about something that I think will really be interesting for a lot of people who are listening and watching right now, which is that ecosystem of marketing. So agencies, vendors, people who are delivering services, either creative services or strategic services, or just execution, perhaps. I wonder how you think about that now, as someone who's kind of lived in both worlds, right? I mean, you're delivering services in terms of consulting through McKinsey now, and you've been on the brands, this divergence of brand side versus client, client side, or however you want to whatever the terminology is,
Yep.
right? And you've been on that side hiring outside consultants as well. And so, in this moment right now, I'm curious to hear your insights about what you think people are looking for. You think marketing leaders are looking for right now in terms of advice, and then how do you stand out if you're delivering some of these services and you're just trying to kind of do it on the same level as you were doing it before, and navigate this time of chaos?
Yeah, great question. So if you think about the best contrast for me, and this shows how old I am, but is in the 20th century, so the 90s or whatever decade you were around and doing your work, we were designing our ecosystem from the inside out, right? We were working. First of all, we decided what we wanted to make, and then could sell it to the world. We could push our communications out, and we could leverage agencies when we needed, and we could fit them in. I think the 21st century, and certainly most of the successful 21st century companies that were born in these last 20 years have really been designed from the outside. And I think the same is really becoming true for this ecosystem that marketing has to deal with. The way we think about designing our ecosystem for marketing should be as much outside in as inside out. Meaning, I expect agencies to be able to work with other agencies. I don't know any other way to do it anymore, right? Like I can't.
They should be better at it. Yeah.
Right. That's key. And I think I love specialist agencies, but they have to also know how to play in a way that can plug their services in with others. I love generalist agencies because they can play across a lot and they can pull together a lot for me. But knowing where they are, knowing how they create value, knowing what we need. I'd also say the thing that I'm seeing a lot with agencies is they're bringing in preferred partners because they're really starting to read a brief more. I'm doing some agency pitches with some of my clients right now, and I'm really impressed with the agencies that really understand what's in that brief. It's almost like beyond the words. And that's really, really important. So I think we just have to think about designing from the outside. I think marketing is an ecosystem. Your team might be some people inside, and frankly, through the pandemic, I've seen a lot of companies kind of release more talent to be freelance and leverage what they need, almost like sprints, if you would, and really creating agile teams that are made up of agencies and freelancers and others. It takes a lot of agility on the leader's part to really be able to work that way and design a team that's truly fit for purpose. But I think it's happening more and more if we just think about an ecosystem that can be outside in versus inside out.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that a lot of what you're describing in terms of being able to kind of see beyond the words that are on the brief and find the true insight and find the core differentiator and bring in the right talent when is needed. I mean, these are universal things. These are not like, oh man, now that the pandemic happened and we've been
Right.
here for months, like all of a sudden we need to have an insight. No,
Yeah.
I mean, that's always kind of been there as this true element of delivering great marketing service or expertise, whether you're in the organization and doing it internally or whether you're an external person. How much of the things that we are doing as marketers right now that you're seeing with the organizations that you're working with are things that would have worked at any time versus kind of tailor-made strategies or communications that you think have been developed because of today, because of what's happening right now?
Yeah, great question. I'm seeing a couple things happen. One, seeing some companies that, and you and I were talking about this a little bit before we started, you know, all of us hope we can in some way emerge better, right? And
Yeah.
I've seen some companies accelerate things that were in their innovation pipeline because now was an idea whose time had come. That's wonderful, right? An idea they couldn't get any space for or airtime in the company, and all of a sudden it's this beautiful idea that is met with, you know, cultural tensions or whatever it may have been. That's one. I think it's accelerating your D&I agendas more than ever. And I think it should. And it took a lot for us to get here, but I love that. It's no longer an option, it's a mandate. We have to do better. And I'm seeing that. I'm seeing more and more companies let go of what's not that important because we can't work the same way we were. And that's really nice to just let go. And it's like, it's just, they're kind of happening organically, if you would. I think the other thing is, I like to swear, so I'll start, but like the bullshit barometer sort of gone up a little bit. Meaning, I think work that is shallow is just not really resonating right now. So more and more companies, I've seen them really strive for more meaning, more purpose, making sure this is grounded in something people actually care about. And that's really kind of nice. And I do think we'll get back to some of the more entertainment or maybe more superficial pieces. People still have a desire to be entertained and sometimes be able to kind of let go, if you would. But I think there has been a bit of a push in that regard as well. So I think in some cases, some things have still worked. Your business was at the right place at the right time and you were doing well before the pandemic. Many are still doing well, but I think they've had to be more sensitive to all of those things we've talked about, be it inclusion, be it how they show up, be it purpose, etc. But for many, it's been a I don't want to call it a blessing in disguise, but it's brought to bear some things that I think have been helpful, and I hope they'll emerge better.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I hope for the same thing. I think maybe we could close our conversation here. I feel like we could keep going for a very long time, but I think we want to pull it to a close,
Yeah.
and I think maybe to bring back the theme of the event a little bit and just talk about the future of marketing. I wonder when you're having that conversation with the marketing leader who is forward thinking. And
Yep.
I think that ideally, the more senior you are, the more you have your vision kind of focused on more than just tomorrow or next week. Uh, you're thinking about 6 months from now. You're thinking about a year from now. Uh, when you are having that conversation to advise that person, I know that to some degree it might depend on the industry, but I wonder,
Mhm.
what do you tell them? Like, what do you tell them to focus on as their priorities if they're sitting there saying, I need to prepare my marketing function and my team and my organization for 6 months from now, for 12 months from now, and I want to start doing those things now. What should they focus on? What do you tell them?
Um, I think they have to get pretty uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is because capability is not built quickly, you have to really build the capabilities that are beyond needed now. And that's hard because we let what's the tyranny of the urgent. And so I like to push to say, listen, for every capability you build that you need right now, think about one that you really need to start getting a pipeline around. Be it either because you decided that skill is going to be internal and you want to build it, because you don't even know what it's going to look like and you need to start to scan the landscape for it. But the data and the analytics is getting far more intelligent than any of us. You're going to need to either have people inside who can leverage that outside world of specialists, or you're going to need to decide that in your ecosystem, that's something you want to be good at. But in the capability space and in terms of what we build our organizations around, we have to go pretty far. And that's not always fun. And I always tell people, listen, there's some capabilities I know you can go buy now outside, but the ones that are going to trip you up later on are the ones you go, nobody outside can do this for me and nobody inside can do this for me. So that would definitely be one. The other thing I would say, and I always want to caution, is we get so excited, and I have been there, the CEOs are so excited about the data abundance in marketing right now. And it is a data abundance that you can almost get addicted to the ROI, that you get so addicted to the ROI, you won't let anything not have an ROI. And if we do that, marketing risks an emotional scarcity. And if marketing starts to become a space of emotional scarcity, then we lose our meaning, and then you see the problem that we have. So the other thing I would say is they build their organization is hold that tension with their leaders, and don't just train them to believe that we can measure everything we do, because we can measure a lot more than we ever could. But the human condition is still the human condition, and I think marketing has to kind of guard that to a degree. So that would be my other one. And then last but not least, I would just keep saying, think about your ecosystem and think about designing your teams in ways that aren't all owned by you, but really feel more like a network.
This is all fantastic advice. I think anyone who's listening is going to be hopefully taking lots of notes and be inspired for the role of marketing in those organizations and their role really in the future, and see themselves and marketing in general as truly being essential. So Rebecca, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time sharing the insights. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
I've enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.